we're going to talk about despair today. But please don't despair, because we're also going to talk about getting past it. Hi, I'm Cypris, and this is my experience with despair. I don't know how typical my story is, but I've got to think that in general, dealing with despair is pretty relevant. We're going to explore how I got into this mess, and then I'll share what I'm plotting to do about it. So grab a cup of something and let's chat. This is going to be 2 videos. In part 2, our next video, I'll perform a ritual to banish despair and, even more importantly, to amplify what is still meaningful in life so that despair has no way to get back in. This is what I'm doing for myself, for my own situation, and I wanted to bring you along because if my struggle and solution can be of any help or inspiration, then so much the better. Let's all amplify that good karma. Teamwork, baby! Alright, let's tackle this beast. Despair isn't really a word we use much nowadays, and as I think about it, I wonder why, because it seems to be a relevant problem for a lot of folks all across the globe, including myself. And I just think the conversation needs to be had. Specifically, is there any hope for those afflicted with the etherizing, energy-sucking grip of despair? Oxford defines despair as the complete loss or absence of hope, but that's not quite accurate for me. Despair has come to me only after I lost the possibility of having meaning and fulfillment in my life. I've actually lived without hope for several years now and find it quite liberating. Hope will make you miserable. Perhaps the distinction here is that even without hope, I can still imagine that not everything that happens will be miserable, if only by random chance. Arguably, at least 5% or so of outcomes should be favorable, right? If everything's a weighted dice roll. So I don't need to despair if I can cling to the statistical probability that over the long haul, a few things will go right. Yes? Abysmal? Also yes, but it's a lot more positive for me than waiting on hope or faith for decades with 0 results. I think the sticky point for me happens when those non-negotiable outcomes that truly matter to the foundation of my soul, like, having basic needs met, finding community, achieving a living wage, when they are not in that 5% sliver of outcome favorability, well, I suppose that is when one really has to face the harsh reality of this existence, and that's bleak, in my opinion. I did a quick Google search to see if any research had been done on the probability of life going well. I was inundated with an avalanche of toxic positivity. Countless articles on how to smile more, exercise, eat well, you know the drill. One article even argued that even people in prison can be happy. So, hold on here. I ask about the chances of life going to plan, and the internet shovels tired self-help rhetoric at me? That's sus. This tells me that we have a world full of people being pressured to force themselves into believing it's their responsibility to be happy when the world around them is actively eroding their sense of meaning and fulfillment. We are to assume our discontent is a psychological failure and just look the other way while the whole world burns? It's enough to turn you into a conspiracy theorist. I'm kind of pissed off. But getting back to my actual topic, I've only been introduced to despair just recently, like in the last year, as I've finally come to accept that the fulfillment of my soul is genuinely not possible. So for me, hope has already been gone a long time, but it is only now that I'm really facing the impossibility of meeting my soul's basic needs, and it's only now that I have found myself experiencing a true despair. But let's back up and spell this out a little. For the last 5 years, Well, actually, I've had a rough time of it most of my life, but let's just focus on these recent 5 years. I've been in a state of intense, all-consuming grief. A lot has gone wrong. It's preposterous, and it would be comical if it didn't hurt so much. And I don't slouch on slogging into my grief. But just as I get through one source of grief, endure the hard work of processing that grief just when I should be coming out the other side, a new grief takes me down, or an even older grief that I never had a chance to face crops up and takes its turn. So, I've been existing in a non-stop parade of deep grief. Some of it, death. But honestly, most of it has been the would-haves, could-haves, should-haves, and never-weres of my life. I guess that sounds like silly, frivolous, first-world problems. But if you've ever been under long-term existential threat, if you've ever faced the great maw of the void, then, well, you know. This is real shit. Having to grieve the death and destruction of all that was valuable and worthy and precious in you, it's brutal. And nobody really sees it. They can see that your body is still exchanging oxygen and can decipher no physical injury. So what the heck are you complaining about? Meanwhile, you've had to have a legit funeral for all the parts of you that you really valued. I imagine the process is different for everyone forced to undergo such an unwelcome transformation. For me, I like who I am now, but I loved who I was. And I'm really resentful that this world is so harsh that it killed all the best that was in me. Now, I am realistic, and I realize it also killed a lot of what was so annoying about me as well. But I could have grown out of that with a lot less agony. I mean, seriously. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of my personal traumas here. I don't think it's helpful for this discussion, especially since I'm still so angry about it. But for the sake of illustrating what I'm saying and giving you all some context, I got a rough start in life. I wasn't socialized, like at all, except by a borderline cult. I escaped that cultish religion in my 20s, and in the aftermath, I have worked myself very hard for very many years to deprogram and to be the best version of myself I can be, with varying levels of success. And at this point, being realistic, I'm so far behind I can never catch up. I have no tribe, no life partner, and my people skills are admittedly rough. Not helping matters, my social anxiety, despite being much calmer than in my 20s, is still a raging contender for my most dominant trait. Thank the goddess, working from home is more of an option now than in years past. I realize this really doesn't reflect well on me. I mean, none of this does. But the grief process of the last 5 years was so brutal for me that I've spent that time mostly in bed. For the first 3 years of it, I was so constantly exhausted. I was starting to believe I had some kind of chronic fatigue. I don't doubt I could probably get some kind of diagnosis even now. But this is the US. Who the heck has insurance? Fortunately, I am recovering my energy levels, albeit glacially. And by glacially, I mean how slowly glaciers creep, not how fast they're melting. Gotta clarify that nowadays. I've come to a place now where I believe I'm through the worst of the grief. And my focus these days is more about what can I do with what I do have? What can this person, these leftovers, expect to accomplish? And it's bleak. My horizons have narrowed considerably, and if I let myself ponder this, I go down hard all over again. I'm not bipolar. I tend toward an even keel, But in the morass of long-term grief, my mood can shift erratically, and when that grief catches me, I have to breathe through it and let it pass on its own. But it does pass, and I can get back after trying to design a life out of the aftermath. What I'm saying is, things are looking up. As depressing as all this is, I am on the better side of it, and my energy, my vitality is coming back. Slowly, but it's coming. Yet, I have been confused, because over the last several months, I have found myself in a sort of sludge, in a state of ennui, having a drained battery. Kind of like my limbs are just too heavy to lift. And so I've been wondering if I'm not coming out of the woods yet. If, in fact, this is some new existential hell I'm being dragged down into. And frankly, it might very well be. But I'm not playing this game anymore. I've got shit to do. This sludginess, it felt a bit like a relapse. But it also felt different from the bone marrow exhaustion of the last 5 years. How do I even explain this? Psychically or emotionally, it felt like I was in a vat of some kind of smoky, tar-like sludge. Like that pollution monster in Fern Gully. It felt exactly like that dude. As I said, I was scared that I had even more devastation coming for me. I've kind of just come to expect that stuff now. And I think if I don't address this right now, that devastation is exactly what would end up happening. But finally, it just dawned on me. This is despair. I just wasn't expecting it at this stage. I am in a state of accepting the reality that all the things that I truly need and truly want are not happening. After decades of never giving up, I'm facing a new, pared down version of my existence. One that is reasonable and possible and not very fulfilling. It sucks, honestly, and this is sad, but also very positive. I'm moving forward, right? I'm accepting reality as it is, not as I need for it to be. We might all need for trees to produce cotton candy and for chocolates to pop up out of the ground like dandelions and for carbohydrates to make us slimmer, but needing it doesn't make it real. We need oxygen to breathe, but sometimes, for some people, their supply is cut off for long enough that their blood starves. We are not promised to have our needs met in this world, no matter how entitled to those outcomes we're taught to be from media, family, and religion. So, I've grieved hard, and I've been working to process and declutter myself of those just mountains of loss. But in doing so, I created a vacuum, an empty space. My soul's warehouse had been a museum of pain, and through shoveling out all of those ashes of grief, it became an empty warehouse. A space I am trying to figure out what to do with, but empty nonetheless. And like water flowing downhill, despair crept in, filling that void. The way nature intended. But as natural as it may be, despair is not useful to humans. Not in any way that I can see. It's like a virus. Not inherently evil, but certainly toxic and debilitating. So I've got to nip this thing in the bud before it really takes hold and moves in. Despair can be fatal. Honestly, tempting, but that's not how I want to go out. And even if it's not ultimately fatal, it does muck about with your aspirations quite messily. Despair is a succubus of a bedfellow. Fortunately, I've trained for this. 2.5 years ago, I designed and performed a banishing spell to alter my energetic body's basic outward makeup from absorbent to reflective. I nursed that spell for a year. I kept it going every week. And it worked. A year and a half after completion, it has continued to have positive cumulative effects for me. Now, despair is a different beast than the collective sludge of human emotional detritus I was fending off 2 years ago. But I think the basics of my earlier banishing spell are a great foundation for a new ritual. And as I've said, I'll be bringing you along as I perform that new spell and new incantations to banish despair and to nurture and amplify the meaningful elements in my life that still exist, so I can fill that void and prevent despair from just flowing back in. But what am I even talking about when I mention the meaningful elements that remain in my life? Okay, go with me on this one. Do you remember the nothing in The Neverending Story? That not really entity, but force of nothingness that tore through all of Fantasia, erasing everyone and everything? I feel like that's a useful way of describing what has happened to me. It didn't happen all at once. It took me piece by piece. And through it all, I kept thinking I could find a way to hold on to what was still left. Until eventually there was nothing but a childlike empress sitting alone in what's left of her ivory chamber, adrift in absolute nothingness. There is nothing physically left of the vast world she once ruled, except for one single grain of sand. And in the film, we'll remember that Bastion is able to make wishes on that grain of sand, and by so doing, the entire fantastical empire eventually rematerializes. Well, it turns out I'm in a bit of a better state than the childlike empress. I did a little personal survey and found that I actually have 5 grains of sand that still remain. Now, 5 grains is still not much of anything. I fully concede that. But hey, I'm already at a 500% advantage here over the empress. And if you're in a similar state of having been erased by despair, I would argue that you too can find a few remnant grains of sand to rebuild with. Okay, I can already hear the comments. Cypris, that's a fun, nostalgic metaphor, but can we get a translation? Yes, I can tell you what my remaining grains of sand turned out to be. One of my sand grains. A laugh if you want, but it's my relationship with my cats. Yeah, cue the stereotypes. I know. But my cats are my nuclear family. I take care of them and they do so much for me in return. These cats I live with are my closest social relationships, and they're so tuned into me. If I'm anxious, they get so stressed out, and I can't even think about getting sad in front of them. It distresses them so much that if I'm gonna melt down, I have to go lock myself in the bathroom and cry on the floor next to the tub like some 90s housewife so I don't freak the cats out. So I say, don't underestimate the soul connection you have with your pets. It's real and it matters. Most of our animals are capable of a form of love that most humans just aren't. My second grain of sand is thrifting. No, really. It feeds my soul. It's one of the very few things I can do outside of the house that replenishes my energy rather than sucking it dry. And when I thrift shop, often I can call in things I need and want, and for a piddly fraction of their retail cost. Thrifting is something that's mine, and that makes me feel good about myself. So don't discount your favorite hobbies. They're a true force of creation. Speaking of which, my third grain of sand is creativity. They say we're all born artists and remain so until someone tells us we're not. I know as a kid I was drawing constantly. Art was my favorite subject in school. But as an adult, I always felt I wasn't allowed to pursue creative projects unless I just snuck it in here and there, like a stolen, forbidden treat. And that's sad, because creative projects, regardless of my actual skill level, make me feel like I exist. Working on videos, for example, has been invaluably satisfying, and it's so joyful, as opposed to the Sisyphean drudgery we experience in most of our activities. So whether it's making art, or sewing, or decorating, or cooking, whatever form your creativity takes, feed it. It's not an indulgent extra, it's a mandatory part of us. My fourth grain of sand is one I didn't have in youth, except perhaps in books and movies, and that's magic in all its forms. Magic is how I work on myself. Magic is how I try to make this world a better place. It gives me a framework for the cosmos that I haven't had since I discovered my childhood religion was a tangle of lies. And the magic helps me, not hope exactly, but to believe that sometimes good can happen, especially when we get our herbs and oils and candles and incantations just right. So look for the magic in your life, in whatever form or forms you're comfortable with. Finally, my fifth grain of sand is my small but mighty tribe of friends. They don't live close and we don't communicate all the time, but they are there and they like me despite all my social and personal quirks. Go figure. And once or twice a year, one or more of them are up for a road trip. And I'm going to include my mother in this too, because let's face it, she's a very close friend. And this way, I don't have to include family as one of my grains of sand. But I can count my brothers as part of my friend group anyway, so we just don't even have to go there with the family stuff. I mean, not my circus, not my monkeys, right? It's okay to prioritize your found family. So whoever has been there for you in some legitimate way, treasure that. It may not be enough. It may not amount to a tribe. You may still have most of your needs unmet. But meaningful human connections are rare in this realm. Let's treasure what we do have. Okay, that's 5 grains of sand. 5 elements in my life that are somehow still alive, active, and present for me. 5 elements that have real meaning and give me an honest measure of fulfillment. Whatever your grains of sand are will be specific to you and may fall into completely different categories. They may be more or fewer than 5. If you're doing this exercise with me, let it percolate. Figure out what you still have. No matter the level of devastation in your life, if you're still breathing, there's probably something meaningful still in your life. Some grain of sand that you can make wishes on. In part 2 of this video project, I will be incorporating my 5 grains of sand into a despair removing ritual. And just like in the movie where wishing on the grain of sand ultimately brought back Fantasia, I want to expand my grains of sand, perhaps not with wishes per se, because of course my hope function is dead, but with gratitude and attention and nurturance. The grass is greener on the side you water. And I need to water my sand. And we'll just see what grows. Please join me next time for the exciting conclusion to this dramatic adventure in despair. Personally, I'm really looking forward to this ritual and the renewed possibility that not everything has to be this bleak forever. We can rebuild our world. It may not be what we ultimately wanted when the world seemed like a fairer place, but it will be something. And I'm curious to find out what that will be. So, do join me for the ritual, and until then, keep your journey wild. We're going... It's so hard to just get started. Why is that? I don't know. Get in the zone. Get in the zone. This is what I'm doing for myself, and you just shook everything. Hi. I can still imagine that not will go right. Did you guys hear that? Oh my god, guys. Oh! Quit photobombing. Only been... Okay, I guess we're doing that over. That is my second grain of...